Picture the imperial court of Luoyang, China. The year is 690 AD. The hall is vast, with a high ceiling. Its red lacquered columns rise up into the shadows, and the air is thick with sandalwood incense. Silk banners ripple in a draft from the open doors. Outside, thousands of courtiers, officials, soldiers, and monks are assembled in ceremonial dress, their breath misting in the autumn air, their eyes trained on the entrance to the main hall. They are waiting to witness something that has never happened before in the entire recorded history of China. When she walks through those doors, dressed in imperial yellow, the color reserved exclusively for the Son of Heaven, not one of them makes a move to stop her. She is 65 years old. She has been building to this moment for half a century, and she is about to do something so unprecedented, so utterly outside of the boundaries of what anyone believed was possible, that historians are still arguing about it 13 centuries later. Welcome back to Venerable Lives, the podcast where we explore the single defining moments that turn people into the figures history remembers. I am your host, Thomas, and today we are telling the story of Wu Zetian, the only woman in 3,000 years of Chinese imperial history to rule, not as regent, not as consort, not as the power behind the throne, but as the emperor of China. She entered the imperial palace at 14 as a minor concubine. She was discarded into a Buddhist convent at 25 with her hair shaved and her future bleak. Then, over the next 40 years, through a combination of intelligence, patience, ruthlessness, and political genius that has rarely been matched in any era or culture, she climbed her way to the top of the most complex and dangerous power structure in the ancient world and simply declared it hers. This is a story about patience as a weapon, about what happens when someone is told over and over again by every institution and tradition that surrounds them that they are not capable of doing the impossible. Wu did it anyway, but it always costs something to decide that the rules do not apply to you. To understand who Wu Zetian was, you have to first understand the world she was born into. China, in the early 7th century AD, was one of the most sophisticated civilizations on Earth. The Tang dynasty, which came to power in 618, had unified a fractured empire and was ruling over a golden age of art, poetry, commerce, and international trade. The Silk Road was humming. Chang'an, the capital, was a city of 1 million people, one of the largest on the planet, and where merchants from Persia, India, and Central Asia sold spices, glassware, and exotic animals in bustling bazaars. It was by almost any measure a world of extraordinary vitality and possibility. For men, that is. For women, even wealthy, educated women, the possibilities were tightly controlled. A woman's life was defined by her relationships to men. First her father, then her husband, then her sons. She had no independent legal standing, no right to hold office, no place in the Confucian hierarchy of power that controlled Tang society from the emperor all the way down to the village farmer. The idea of a woman ruling China was not merely unconventional, it was offensive. It violated the natural order of heaven and earth, the yin and the yang, the fundamental structure through which the Chinese understood the universe to be organized. A female ruler was not just unusual, it was in the deepest sense wrong. Wu was born in 624 AD in Wenxi County, in what is now Shaanxi Province, to a man named Wu Shihua. Her father had made his fortune in the timber trade, and then made his name by backing the right side in the civil war that brought the Tang dynasty to power. He was rewarded with noble rank, with wealth, with access to the highest levels of society. Wu Shihua always kept one foot in front of society's rules. He chose to educate his daughters in a world where a girl's education ended at basic literacy. Wu's father taught her to read the classics, to write, to play music, to think. Can you imagine what that felt like for a girl in 7th century China? To be handed the keys to a world that the entire culture around you insisted you had no right to enter. Young Wu, she would not take the name Zetian until much later in life, absorbed everything. She read history and philosophy. She studied calligraphy with the precision of someone who understood that every character written was an act of intellectual authority. She played the pipa, the 4-string lute that was the instrument of the Tang court's finest musicians, and she developed from an early age the kind of watchful, probing intelligence that tends to make powerful people either fascinated or deeply uncomfortable. She was both beautiful and formidably clever, which in her world was a combination that could either save your life or end it. Her father saw what she was becoming, and to his credit, did not try to contain it. He let her read everything. He gave her a mind with no ceiling, and then sent her into a world that was going to spend the next 50 years trying to contain it. At the age of 14, in the year 638, she was selected to join the imperial harem of Emperor Taizong, one of the greatest rulers in Chinese history, a man who had unified the empire through military brilliance and then governed it through administrative genius. To be chosen as one of his concubines was an immense honor for a family, but for the girl herself, it was a form of capture. Wu entered a palace of thousands of women, most of whom would live and die in its gilded corridors without ever speaking to the emperor. She was only a junior concubine, one of the lowest levels in the elaborate hierarchy of imperial consorts. Her function, officially, was decorative. Her prospects were limited to hoping that the emperor might notice her someday. Emperor Taizong did notice her, but not in the way the system intended. According to Tang court records, Wu was assigned to assist with laundry for the imperial household, about as far from the center of power as you could get. She managed to find herself alone with the emperor and spoke to him directly about Chinese history. Think about the audacity of that moment. A junior concubine, a teenager, speaking without fear to the Son of Heaven about politics and history. This could have been catastrophic. Instead, Taizong was astonished. He had dozens of concubines chosen for their beauty. He had not expected to find one so intellectually capable. Intrigued by her brilliance, Taizong made her secretary of the emperor. For a concubine to become so trusted by the emperor, to have access to official documents, to correspond with ministers and generals, and to attend to the daily business of running an empire, was nearly without precedent. Wu spent the next decade taking notes, not just on paper, but in her mind. She was watching how power functioned at the very highest level, learning which ministers were competent and which were merely well-connected, understanding the levers and fulcrums of the Tang bureaucracy from the inside. She was storing everything, and she was forming, quietly, a picture of the system she would one day need to dismantle and rebuild. When Taizong died in 649, Wu was 25 years old. The system closed around her like a trap. The custom was clear. Concubines who had not produced children for a deceased emperor were sent to a Buddhist convent and remained there for the rest of their lives. No exceptions. Wu's head was shaved. She was dressed in a gray nun's robe. She was sent to Ganye Temple, where the doors closed behind her. For most women, this was the end of the story. What would you have done in her place? 25 years old, your world compressed to a convent garden. Your future reduced to prayers and ceremony for the next 50 years. Wu waited. That is a thing about her that history keeps underestimating. She was not impulsive. She was not reckless. She was patient in the way that only someone with absolute confidence in their own destination can be. Imagine sitting in that convent, the silence of it, the gray walls, the prescribed hours of prayer and work. You are 25. You have spent 11 years at the center of the most sophisticated court on earth. You have read the state documents of an empire. You have spoken as an equal to the Son of Heaven, and now you are folding laundry and chanting sutras while watching the years contract around you. Most people would have broken. They would have accepted the grief of it, the injustice of it, and found a way to make peace with a smaller life. Wu did not make peace. She treated the convent as a war room, and while she waited, she cultivated a relationship that would change everything. Before Tao Sheng died, Wu had attracted the attention of his son, the prince Li Ji. Their connection was politically scandalous. A relationship between a father's concubine and his son violated deep Confucian taboos. But Li Ji became Emperor Gaozheng when his father died, and he had not forgotten her. Empress Wang, Gaozheng's reigning consort, was engaged in a bitter rivalry with his favorite concubine named Consort Zhao, and she calculated that bringing Wu back to court might divert the emperor's attention and weaken her rival. It was a political miscalculation of historic proportions. Empress Wang opened the gate to let Wu back into the garden, not realizing that the woman she was letting in had spent years studying exactly how gardens like this one worked. What happened next was surgical. Wu did not fight with fists. She maneuvered. She bore Gaozheng's sons, 4 of them, and a daughter. She cultivated allies in the bureaucracy, identifying which officials were ambitious and which were merely comfortable, which ones resented the old aristocratic order, and which ones were its beneficiaries. She made herself indispensable to an emperor who was deeply fond of her and increasingly reliant on her political judgment, and she watched Empress Wang and Consort Zhao exhaust themselves fighting each other, saving her own energy for the moment it would count. By the year 655, Empress Wang and Consort Zhao had been accused of crimes against the imperial household. The details are grim and disputed by modern historians, but the outcome is not. Both women were stripped of their titles, imprisoned, and later executed with a brutality that seemed assigned to send a message to anyone watching. Wu had not just defeated her rivals, she had made an example of them. She was elevated to the position of Empress Consort. The woman who had arrived at court as a junior concubine now wore the second highest title in the empire. It had taken her 17 years, and she was far from finished. For the next 2 decades, Wu governed alongside Gaozheng in what became one of the most unusual partnerships in imperial history. The emperor was brilliant, but physically fragile. He suffered from chronic headaches, poor eyesight, and what court records describe as episodes of dizziness and cognitive fog that historians now suspect may have been series of strokes. Wu read the documents he could not see clearly. She met with the ministers that he could not. She drafted policy that went under his seal. She received foreign envoys in his place. In practice, if not in title, she was already just as powerful as the emperor himself. By 660, when a severe stroke left Gaozheng significantly impaired, Wu was effectively running the empire alone. Court officials, acknowledging reality with the careful language of their profession, began referring to the two of them as the two sages, a way of saying, without quite saying, that the entire empire had a female mind at its center. Can you imagine the discomfort of those court officials, writing that phrase, knowing what it meant, knowing there was no precedent for it, no good Confucian framework in which to contain it, and yet they wrote it because the alternative, pretending that the empire was being run effectively without her, was simply too absurd to maintain. Gao Sheng died in 683. Wu was 58 years old. This is where our story takes its most extraordinary turn, because this was the moment when everyone assumed she would step back. She was Empress Dowager now, an honored position, a powerful position even, but a position defined by its relationship to male authority. Her son, Shangzong, was the new emperor. Wu was supposed to advise him, perhaps guide him gently, and allow the Tang dynasty to resume its natural order of male succession. She would be consulted, she would be venerated, and she would step back. That was the script that history had written for a woman in her position, and it was the script that virtually every woman in her position had followed, because the alternative was unthinkable. Wu did not follow the script. Shangzong lasted 6 weeks. He made the catastrophic error, a provocation as a young man testing his mother's limits, suggesting that he might grant formal governmental authority to his father-in-law, effectively inserting another power center into the structure Wu had spent decades building. She had him deposed and replaced with another son, Ruoshang. Having watched what happened to his brother from a very short distance, he was considerably more in line. He reigned for 6 years as essentially Wu's instrument, his name on the edicts, her mind behind them, her hand on every lever that mattered. What would you do with a mother like that? What do you say when the most powerful person in the empire is the woman who raised you, and she had just demonstrated what happens to imperial sons who forget who is really in charge? In the late 680s, Wu began laying the groundwork for the boldest move of her life. She commissioned a group of Buddhist monks to produce a commentary on an ancient text called the Great Cloud Sutra, a document that, conveniently, contained prophecies about a female ruler who'd come to govern the world and eradicate illness, worry, and disaster from it. This document was circulated throughout the empire. Copies were placed in temples in every province. The message was carefully constructed. Wu was not an anomaly, not a violation of the natural order. She was a fulfillment of it, in human form, a divine ruler whose coming had been foretold. Wu understood something that sword-happy rulers often miss, that power requires narrative. You cannot simply take a throne. You have to give people a story about why you deserve it. The Confucian establishment would never provide that story. It was so structurally incapable of imagining a female emperor within its framework. So Wu went around Confucianism entirely. She used Buddhism, which had more inclusive theology, a broader conception of spiritual authority, and a network of temples and monks who could carry her message to every corner of the empire. It was, by any modern standard, a masterclass in political communication. In late 690, with the groundwork laid, Wu moved. Her son, Emperor Ruoshang, submitted a petition we can suspect was not entirely voluntary, asking his mother to take the throne directly. Senior ministers added their voices. Wu, with the unhurried authority of someone who had been waiting for this moment for decades, accepted. She declared a new dynasty, the Zhao. She renamed the capital of Luoyang the Divine Capital. She assumed the title of Sage and the Divine Emperor, not Empress, not Empress Dowager, but Emperor, the same title that had been held by every male ruler of China for as long as anyone could remember. She did one more thing that always struck me as the detail that captures her most completely. She created a new Chinese character for her own name, a character that combined the images of the sun and moon above a mountain, as though the sky itself needed to be rewritten to contain what she was. The old language, she seemed to be saying, does not have the vocabulary for me, so I am inventing new words. The court accepted it, not all of them willingly. Confucian scholars were deeply unsettled. There were purges of officials who expressed their displeasure too loudly. Wu had installed a system of surveillance and enforcement that would have been recognized by any student of authoritarian governance. Copper suggestion boxes placed outside government buildings to encourage citizens to report on officials, and a swarm of secret police officials known for their methods of interrogation so brutal that their torture techniques acquired darkly poetic names. The apparatus was real, and it was feared. But what is so striking across the historical record is how little open resistance there was. The empire did not fracture. The army did not rebel. The provinces did not secede. A 65-year-old woman put on imperial yellow and sat on the dragon throne, and China kept steaming forward. Why? Partly because of the purges, partly because of the Buddhist legitimization campaign, but also one has to reckon with this, because she was good at it. Wu's 15 years as emperor were by almost any administrative measure effective. She expanded and deepened the civil service examination system, opening government position to men of humble origin who could demonstrate merit, rather than reserving them for sons of the aristocracy. The implications of this reform rippled through Chinese society for a millennium. It is one of the foundations of the meritocratic civil service that governed China until the 20th century. She ordered the compilation of agricultural manuals, built irrigation systems, reduced the tax burden on farmers, and in 1695 declared a tax-free year for the entire empire. She expanded China's influence along the Silk Road, and she did something quietly remarkable. She elevated the status of mothers and grandmothers in the official mourning ceremonies of the Tang court, making their grief and their relationships officially visible to the state in a way they had never been before. She also protected some of the best minds of her era. Di Renjie, arguably the greatest statesman of the Tang period, served as her chief minister and had the rare distinction of being someone who could disagree with Wu Zetian directly and survive. When Wu's secret police attempted to have Di Renjie and several other senior officials executed on fabricated charges of treason, Wu intervened. She reviewed the evidence personally. She saw through the fabrication and protected them. It is a detail that complicates the portrait of her pure ruthlessness that later historians were eager to paint. She was not simply cruel. She was calculated. And calculation includes knowing when mercy produces better outcomes than violence. A ruler who only ever destroys eventually runs out of people worth keeping. Wu never forgot that the goal was governance, not terror. The portrait that emerges if you look at the full record, rather than the version written by the men who succeeded her, is of a ruler who was more effective than most of her male counterparts and considerably more deliberate. She read every document that came to her desk. She consulted widely before making major decisions. She maintained the Tang Empire's stability through a period that could have easily descended into chaos. The transition from a reigning emperor's widow to sole ruler is exactly the kind of moment when an empire fractures, when regional governors assert independence, when generals start calculating their own chances. None of that happened. The empire Wu handed to history was larger, better administered, and more meritocratically organized than one she had inherited. Was she ruthless? Absolutely. Was she also good at her job? Undeniably. We are left with the question of how history chose to remember her. The male historians who wrote the official Tang records in the decades after her death were not neutral observers. They had a dynasty to restore and a narrative to rebuild, one in which the natural order of male imperial succession had merely been interrupted by an aberration, one in which a woman had simply outgoverned most men. They wrote her as a monster. They emphasized the cruelty, the sexual transgressions, and the executions. They recycled accusations that had been weaponized against her by rivals during her lifetime. Some of it was true, some of it was embellished, and some of it, including claims that she murdered her own infant daughter to frame a rival, historians today regard as almost certainly invented, a story too perfectly damning to be trusted. The pattern is not unique. Across centuries and cultures, powerful women who refuse to stay in their assigned roles have consistently been described in terms of their bodies and their appetites, rather than their minds and their accomplishments. It is worth knowing about that record before you read it. Wu Zetian was deposed in 705 by a palace coup organized by her own officials while she lay ill in her chambers. She was 80 years old. The Tang dynasty was officially restored. Her son, Shangzong, the one she had deposed decades earlier, was placed back on the throne. Wu was stripped of her imperial title, though she was allowed to retain honorary status as Empress Dowager. She died later that year, leaving instructions that her tombstone should be left blank. No inscription, no list of titles or accomplishments. Historians debate what this request meant. Some say it was humility. Some say it was an acknowledgement that no words can contain what she had done. I like to think she simply understood the blank stone would make people ask questions, and that Wu Zetian had always preferred questions to answers she did not control. Her instructions were clear. Her family and the court that had deposed her honored them. That stone, which still stands today at Qianling Mausoleum in Shaanxi Province, blank as the day it was placed, has fascinated historians for 1,300 years. What does that tell us about what she actually wanted? Not recognition, not legacy, not the validation of history. She wanted the thing itself, the throne, the power, the ability to shape the world according to her judgment. The rest was just noise. Have you ever wanted something that badly? Have you ever been so clear about what you were building toward that the records and the acknowledgments didn't matter, only the doing of it? The blank stone is, in its own way, the most eloquent statement she ever made. She was telling history. Figure it out for yourselves. I already know what I did. That is our story for today. If Wu Zetian's story moved you, if it made you think differently about patience, or ambition, or the rules we accept without questioning, please share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Leave us a review wherever you listen. Subscribe here and to our newsletter at venerablelives.com so you never miss a new episode. And come back next time, because we have another extraordinary story waiting, another person, another crossroads, another moment where one human being's choice bent the arc of history. Until then, I'm your host Thomas, and this has been Venerable Lives.